We are now live on YouTube with the February 25th meeting of the Node.js Bootstrap team. We're joined today by myself and 10 other panelists, and we have a pretty full agenda, although we may have some spare time today, as what happened 2 weeks ago. I guess just a quick update on the process and where we're at before we dig in on things. The Bootstrap process has been running publicly since October with these weekly meetings, since we did the announcement of the intent to merge at the Node plus JS Interactive Conference. Since then, we've developed a process for creating proposals for governance of the new merged foundation. And we've been writing a number of proposals to kind of get what would be needed for the minimal viable bits to create the bylaws for the foundation. We're now at the point where we have, the general scope and vision of it. We already have some proposals. If you go to github.com/nodejs/bootstrap, there's a folder called proposals. And there you can see we have stage 0, stage 1, stage 2, and stage 3 proposals. Stage 0 is more like, hey, we have this idea and we think it's cool and we want to explore it. Stage 1 is like, not only do we have an idea, but here's like everything we would need for implementation, but we don't have consensus on the specifics. Stage 2 means as a group, the community process has kind of stamped this and said, we want to move forward with it and we want to take it to the board in case there's any feedback. And then stage 3 means that the board has signed off on it. And in this case, it is both boards, not just the Node.js board, but the JSF board would have to approve of it as well. So today, we're digging in and we're starting off with a couple of proposals that we're looking to move to stage 2. And we can get started with the CPC charter proposal. It's currently stage 1. It's moving to stage 2. And we have, I believe Michael Dawson was the one who originally drafted this. Michael, do you want to give a quick overview of this proposal, and then we can have some discussion to see if we're ready to agree to stage 2 on it?
Sure. Let me just pull it up as a reminder to myself. So I'm just going there. Right. So this provides an outline of what the makeup of the CPC would be, along with its what the roles and responsibilities are. The version we ended up moving to stage 1 includes observers, regular members, and voting members. Everybody is open to join and participate as an observer. Regular members, we ask that it be people from the projects who've contributed for some amount of time there. They get added to sort of the list of the overall members. And, the hope is that they're sort of, participating in an ongoing way versus observers may just sort of drop in whenever they want. And then finally, voting members are the members who will resolve cases where we can't come to consensus among all of the members, as well as vote on specific things in terms of which projects get added through the project progression proposal or, any of the sort of state transitions. But the goal is that, overall, we have a group of members who work together. Hopefully that's a largest set of individuals who can all work to fulfill the roles and responsibilities of the CPC. There's quite a long list of those, so I'm not going to, go over them, but people can basically go back to the doc to see the specifics. Elections, it covers there being a chairperson and for the CPC, as well as a director representative, which may or may not be the same person. I'm just trying to think the other specific things that are covered in there. Covers decision making. So as I said, it's lazy consensus. Hopefully we get consensus. Otherwise, the voting members are the ones who will be able to vote in cases where that doesn't happen. There is additionally, in addition to the board representative, which is the CPC board representative, there's also the CPC has 2 other seats, which are sort of under its auspices. The first one is one where, every year it can decide on a process for selecting a second member, provided that there's enough platinum members, and then a third one, which is earmarked for the individual membership program that again activates when there's enough members of that program and enough platinum members. I think that's a good enough overview.
So just some quick notes that I can add here. So we have a pull request open right now. It is pull request number 100. It's a nice even number. I'll drop it in the chat. Pull request 100 moves the current CPC charter proposal from stage 1 to stage 2, meaning that as a community, we're happy at where it currently exists. I do just noticed a little mistake there, which I am currently hot patching as we go. And the stage 2 proposal, the only real substantive changes to it is the changing of the word top level to impact and being explicit that they may nominate up to 2 members through a process. This was based on feedback from the JSF projects that perhaps only wanted to have 1 member. It's kind of dawning on me right now that we may want to have some explicit text in here about minimum numbers, if those are expectations of an impact level project, but that also may be something that makes sense to live in the project proposal or in a separate document. I don't think that we need to kind of block anything based on that right now. Another thing worth mentioning, we had a board meeting for the Node.js Board of Directors on Friday. All of the proposals that were necessary to create the bylaws were reviewed. There were no major concerns with the charter, although there was one note that the board wanted to see changed before this would move to phase 3. Specifically, they wanted to see language introduced to make things explicit about the chartering of projects. So to be more explicit here, currently the Node.js project is chartered by the board of directors. And in theory, I think we have to be more explicit about this because we weren't explicit in the current charter. Chartering of other projects would become the purview of the CPC. Michael, would you say that's an accurate depiction of the intent within this document?
Yes, I think that, yeah. I mean, as part of the project progression, yeah. I mean, it's CPC that says, makes the decisions on which projects, go to different stages, and really chartering is effectively part of one of those stages.
Mm-hmm. Or chartering may even be something that's necessary to join the foundation altogether. And joining the foundation is something that is, the final decision does come to the CPC, and it's set up in such a way that the board does not have a choice in that matter. Like, that's maybe a negative way of framing it, but it's not the board's decision. It's the community's decision about what new projects would join. And there was no pushback in changing that, but they did want to see slightly more explicit language about who would be chartering the projects and what would be the process of changing charters specifically. And I think this is where the board wanted some insight, and I'll have more explicit notes as a follow-up.
Right.
Couldn't block landing to stage 2. But essentially that, like, if a project wanted to make extensive changes to their charter that the CPC would view as going outside of the scope of the goals and vision of the foundation as a whole, that may be something that would be escalated to the board to intervene. And so I think we need to work out the language on that in particular. And I think it was specifically about the cases where projects were going in a direction that was at odds with the foundation itself.
Right. Yeah. If you can give me some of that feedback, I'll take a cut at merging it in. As I understand it, it's basically that, and I don't know whether it best fits in the project progression or in the CPC charter, but having better seeing the feedback, I can help with my thought on that. But I could see that, yes, it should be clear that if you want to change your charter, who do you take that to? Who makes the decision?
Yep. And I think that was just the main thing, is like there was nothing, like the word charter for other projects is not mentioned at all.
Yep.
Just making sure that makes sense. So with that being said, I'd like to propose that we move the CPC charter to phase 2.
I do want to point out there, like in this PR, I did add a bunch of other ones which were to reflect the changes that were discussed, I think 2 meetings ago, or maybe last meeting if I didn't make it.
Okay.
It does change the board representation from the way it had been previously written was 2 that the CPC decided on in any way, to make it so that there's 1 that they can decide and then 1 that's earmarked for the individual membership program, as well as to add the activation thing. So just not to, I mean, I don't think that's a surprise to anybody, but that is something else that's actually in this PR.
So I just am curious because I don't think, I personally hadn't really come to a conclusion whether I felt like the third floating board seat should be specifically earmarked at this point in time for the individual membership program. And this may be getting ahead because as I thought about it, the more it occurred to me that we may be limiting our impact by saying we're going to earmark this for a program that has to reach these certain requirements, but we're not even frankly quite sure if we will ever make those requirements because, for example, we need to have 2,000 members in the individual membership program. So I'm just wondering if we've preemptively lost a board seat, so to speak, for the community because of this decision.
Well, it's worse than that in that the wording in the various places now says that board seat doesn't even exist until you hit that 2,000.
So I can speak a little bit to that. And if we do not have, I was under the impression from past meetings that we had consensus to move forward with that. And the current draft bylaws that have been being reviewed are all being based on, that being a thing. And it was the people who have been working on the individual membership program very much wanted, information, like things documented in the bylaws. I guess there's kind of 2 or 3 different things I can point out. Like one would be that bylaws and charters can be adapted later. We've done this in the past in the Node project. The third seat, there used to be 2 individual member directors, and we did convert one of them into a director for the community committee. I think that was part of it. I think a big idea was creating a board seat that acted as an incentive for us to kind of see through and work on that proposal and work on that program was something that we wanted to encourage. And then, kind of the other thing for me, at least with it, was thinking about bandwidth and how much resources we have for onboarding new directors already as it is. I myself am not going to be continuing to be a director, at least a community director, once the merger happens. And we're going to have to find 2 new directors. I can't speak for Tracy, but I believe Tracy was in somewhat of a same boat as well. And so I think the resources of trying to onboard 3 new directors is going to be substantially more than onboarding 2. And if we find that we don't think that that third seat is ever going to materialize, I don't view that as a lost seat. I view that as something for us to iterate towards. And, in 6 months, if we don't think that we're seeing anything productive there, there's absolutely no reason why that can't be brought to the board and amended to make it just a general seat. That was at least my thought process with it. But I can understand, the other side of how people would feel about it. Jory and Michael, does that change your thought process on it at all? Or are you still kind of landing where you're at?
So, I mean, it certainly gives me personally more like context and, just also a clear picture of like the intent, which is for especially the folks who are really passionate about the individual membership program to kind of have that target, which I think is also super important. And I wouldn't want to, to not have that for them. At the same time, I don't think that I agree that, for example, you shared that, oh, well, if in 6 months, we haven't quite got to this point. I really do think that the individual membership program might take years to get to the level of participation required to get them that board seat. And so I would then rather encourage the reverse, which would be that the CPC will transition that to a board seat when the individual, an individual membership earmarked board seat when they hit those numbers. But before, I just I guess that's my point of view.
Yeah, I'll add in that. I share, Miles' point about, finding enough people to fill the board seats. I do think it's much easier to ask now than to ask in 6 months and say, hey, we want another board seat. So if we think we really want 2 in the interim versus, 3, so that the chair plus 2 others, if we think we want that in the interim, it's better to ask for it now than later. And, you could change the wording to say, it's up to the CPC, except that once, the individual membership hits 2,000, then it's no longer their choice. That would change the activation criteria.
Yeah.
But I updated this, it's like, as long as there's consensus, I figured, okay, this is what we'll update it to.
I guess something to add to that, you could take it or leave it, but we did have consensus at the board for the community proposal. And I think we're kind of bleeding between 2 agenda items right now, because the next agenda item, or the third agenda item that we had for this, was the community board representation one. We did have consensus at the board with the current proposal and the current allocations that we had, including the activation at 2,000 for that third board seat. It's not to say that—
interrupt you for
Pardon?
1 second. We also had consensus with this group with this language, I thought. With the activation at 2,000 even, like, this isn't new language, so I'm kind of surprised by that.
Yeah, no, the difference is that the way the CPC charter was written before was that there were 2, and it didn't actually say that one was earmarked for the individual membership program.
But we have a community proposal, which we had at least 2 weeks ago consensus around that specific proposal. At least that was my impression, but it hadn't landed as stage 2, so obviously we still need to
right.
work.
I wasn't there, so I updated it to reflect that, because it's like, okay, yeah, if there was consensus, that's good.
But I guess the point that I'm trying to make is that, like, it appears that I had thought that we had consensus within this group, and we had consensus at the board on Friday's meeting for the proposal that includes the earmarked seat. And we can change this. We can change both the charter, the CPC charter, as well as the community director proposal charter to reflect conversion, where we have a third seat that converts into an individual membership seat at the time that it activates. That will be, just a change in language, but we will have to bring that back to the boards and redraft the bylaws to reflect that. It's not to say that that won't all work, but I do think that we do need to reflect on the fact that we have consensus around, or appearing consensus around something, and going back to the drawing board could reflect and have more pushback on the other side. Not guaranteed. I mean, it could go over absolutely fine, but I'm just kind of weighing out what could be the reality of the situation. And I guess then, maybe a very simple thing to put forward, to Jory and Michael, who seem to be the ones who have opinions on this. Are you objecting to landing those 2 PRs, the CPC charter and the community directors, as they currently are written to stage 2, which is totally fine? I just think we may as well be explicit about that, because if that's the case, then we should maybe switch what we're talking about.
So apologies for appearing to throw a wrench in anybody's sort of plans or understanding. That certainly was not an intention. I thought the exact nature of how the 3 board sheets we were proposing to be under the auspices of the CPC was still under discussion, and it seems like for some of us that was a decision that was taken. If I am really the only person who sees this as being a step backward, in terms of what I think is more effective for the community, then by all means I don't want to block anything, but I just want to then raise it as a point of consideration, and we can move on.
So go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I also, what Jory is proposing makes more sense to me. Especially given that the individual membership hasn't, solidified yet, like the plan for that. I guess one question I do have around that is like, adopting a term from gaming. What's the difficulty of landing like a day one patch, of basically updating this as soon as it ships? That kind of approach, is that okay? Or can we set that expectation with the board now? Or would that be more difficult?
I think that the expectation, and Sarah or someone else from the board or Dolan can correct me if I'm wrong, but none of this stuff is set in stone. Anything can be revisited as we go if we see that it's problematic. And, obviously having consensus on something is not the same as maybe changing it in the future, to Jory's point. So if we ask for more now and get consensus around that, we have it. Whereas if we don't have it now, we do need to get sign off in the future for it. But the flip side of that being, we have sign off on something that we know of, and we don't know if we will get sign off on another thing. But to your exact question, Tierney, I believe that the board will operate in good faith. And I believe that if we don't see that seat being grown into and want to amend bylaws to do so, that we will be able to do that. I don't think that there's any intention of taking away any of these seats. And I think that it was mostly designed, at least in my thought process, to allow us to scale and to scale up, because historically, the community board seats have not always been the most effective or the most productive. And it's a very hard balance to make sure that those community members who don't have board experience are mentored and brought into those roles. And I'm personally, as someone who has gone through this process, and it's taking me over a year to really feel like I can be effective in that role, I do have concerns about us onboarding too many people at once and not being able to be effective.
I think, Miles, maybe to address that particular concern, rather than have it be gated on a number of, because I don't know that we're actually asking for too much more here, because we've been granted the CPC will have 3 board seats. And what we have just said was that we will make those activate at different points. Now what we're saying is, rather than we'll have 2 floating board seats, we can keep one of those activation points to be, instead of 3 platinum members and 2,000 individual members, we can say, 3 platinum members, and it will activate in a year if the issue is, if the issue is giving people, or 6 months or whatever that time is, if the issue is giving people time to on-ramp and make sure that there's a support system to train those people, mentor those people as needed. And then also within the CPC, we can say, and when the individual membership program reaches 2,000, that will convert to a board seat for that particular program.
So I guess I have a very practical question. If we were to try to fill those seats right now, who would it be? And I've asked, I asked this specifically just to make sure we're optimizing for something. And I'm sorry if I'm coming across as difficult, but this is a question I've posed to the TSC multiple times and I've not had anyone volunteer. And within the whole project, I've seen one person from the Node project volunteer to potentially take on this role.
So from the board side, I mean, the way it's currently written, it says the one will come from the Node project. And I think we'll find a volunteer on that side from within the ComCom or the technical steering committee. So my question would be, if we change this to the second one activating now, in the interim before the individual membership program ramps up, would we, Jory, do you think we'd have a volunteer from some of the projects, of the other projects?
I think so. But it's also hard to say that without, actually opening it up and, having the conversation in a way that doesn't feel like we're putting too many people on the spot, vis-a-vis saying who's going to fill it right now. Who do we think is going to fill those spots?
Right.
I don't know. And I'm also not of the opinion that the spot has to be filled, right? Like if nobody steps forward, that's a data point as well. So.
Mm-hmm. So I mean, I guess we have a couple different ways of moving forward on this. I think there was also intention with the number that was chosen in the gating was that we want people who are community representatives to the board to be representing community groups, not just private interest. So that number of 2,000 was supposed to be a large enough scale for the individual membership program that there would actually be a need for that representation that couldn't be handled by the CPC rep. So I think that there's like a couple different ways that we can move forward here. And, three that I have off mind is one is, we move forward with what we have. A second is we augment the number that we have for the activation, maybe move it to something like 500 or 1,000 rather than 200. Or, the alternative to that is, revisiting that language altogether as to what that seat works with. I will say for myself, I don't like I like the idea of that seat being for one specific thing. Because depending on how we want to do the activation, if it happens midterm, for example, do you wait until if the program gets to 2,000 people in the middle of the year or a month after we've just elected someone else to the board, do we then have to wait 10 months until that group can have representation? There's just a lot of edge cases there that I think get weird if that one particular seat is not earmarked. But we could do a thing where that third seat is always available and then converts into an individual membership seat.
One question I have is the 2,000 participant in individual membership, is that defined in the charter already, or can that be decided by the CPC or augmented by the CPC?
That number of 2,000, I believed, is baked into anything that involves a board seat needs to be baked into the bylaws. It's also baked into, I don't even know if I think that number is baked into the charter as well for the CPC. And if we wanted to change that, we would change that by making a proposal to the board that makes a change to both the CPC charter as well as the bylaws.
Okay.
Right. I think we always, that number was in the proposal that was made for Node. And if you just think about a seat for the individual membership program, I think it makes total sense that that's the activation criteria. I think where we ended up is, we had a CPC charter that had proposed two floating seats. And we've kind of combined one of those seats with the individual membership program. And that's, I guess, the different proposals you could have gone with are, there's two floating ones, you add in the individual membership as a third one that activates at a certain thing. Or you can do with the way it's currently written where it's no, it's earmarked. Or you could have one where it's you have two, and eventually when it once the individual membership program is ready, then it gets flipped over.
So we have 3 community seats, and I think we'd be very hard pressed to get a fourth, at least today. So I don't think that we'd have a place where the CPC would have those 2 floating seats and then an additional. And so I think the question is, do we have that additional one as one that converts? And I think the reason why, you know, I've been pushing on what we currently have proposed is it seemed like the simplest thing. It was cut and dry. It had the least amount of overhead and having to think about things, and it minimized the amount of stuff that we needed to do additionally as a community to make good on kind of like our commitment to the board, because it's a non-trivial commitment. But I also see how it can be seen as us temporarily losing one of those representatives. So I think at this point I'm going to ask one more time: do people object to the current proposals moving to phase 2, specifically the current CPC charter and the proposal for community reps? Because if that is the case, then, you know, we kind of need to kick things back and iterate on that pretty quickly. And we may even want to spend the rest of this meeting essentially just reaching consensus on what language we want there and getting that to the boards as soon as possible.
I would like to ask, what is underlying this? Because we've talked about this particular language and these different frameworks, including one dedicated CPC director seat, one floating seat, which initially we expect to go to node.js, and then the activating after 2,000 people join the individual membership or the individual contributor group. Sorry, I'm losing the words right now. But we've been talking about this once a week for going on 2 months. So I'm confused as to what the change is and why suddenly today we're backing away from what we've been discussing. Does anybody know what?
I'm free. I'm happy to chat since it seems
okay.
to be opened this box here. That's not entirely the way that I understand how this is, how we've come to this point.
Okay.
So there were obviously multiple proposals in the last couple of weeks. We got the individual membership proposal finally fairly late in the game, which then introduced this requirement for a board seat for the individual member, which is not on the surface, on the face of it, anything I think anybody particularly opposes. But when we were talking about community representation, until we had that individual membership proposal, it was being framed as there was 2 floating board seats for the community, and then a proposal for the director / chair, whomever. So I was under the impression that we did not have a real decision made on whether it was going to be the third seat was a floating seat for the CPC, or the third seat was earmarked for the individual membership. At our town hall last week, it was communicated fairly confidently that it was going to be the latter, and that kind of surprised me, because I personally didn't think that I had made my mind up yet, and I wanted to weigh the trade-off with the group about giving whether we really wanted to set that aside for now, or if we wanted to convert that to an individual membership board seat later. But it sounds like the rest of you had a much firmer idea about what that meant than I did, in which case, apologies for missing the memo.
Well, and if we didn't communicate it well enough, our apologies for that as well. But this, I think, as we had been discussing the 2 floating seats, one of which was expected to be the individual contributor, and then with the program development, the 2,000 person gate on that is to manage the need for any voting body to be large enough to be representative or small enough to be those people being governed. And so it needs to be a balance in this.
Right, yeah, which I don't disagree with that at all. I mean, I think it's got to be a high threshold, but I wasn't under I guess I wasn't convinced that we needed to have that set aside right from the outset.
Mm-hmm. And I guess I'll add is that I don't think anybody ever said, yeah, when we adopt this, we're reducing the other proposal from 2 to 1, which is effectively what we're doing. We're saying there's one floating seat and one earmarked for the individual membership program. So I can easily understand how that was not as clear.
I guess like a thing that'll add, is the community proposal went to stage 1. January 21st was when it was merged, and it was opened on January 10th. It had explicit language for all of this. And, Jory, you signed off on that proposal, and we've had the proposal for stage 2 open for 8 days now, which, Michael, you have signed off on.
Right. So that you're getting into a different point of whether we object or not in this particular case. But there were 2 conflicting proposals that both landed. So I don't think pushing on, hey, you saw this is the right way to go. I think it's like, what do we think is the right answer?
I think the challenge.
Yep, go ahead.
Sorry. I think the challenge here is the disconnect of expectations that 2 board seats always included one of them being an individual director seat, somehow figured out based on the individual director proposal. And somewhere another group believes or thought that there were the 2 floating board seats. And then there might also be the individual director proposal and individual director or individual membership proposal and director based on that. And I think that's where we miss.
Yep.
Okay.
So I think in my mind, it's like if 3 is the number and we're not going to get more than 3, it's like, what's the right answer? Or it's like, if there's some fixed parameters, we should work with those.
So this is Mike Dolan. I apologize. I joined late after a conflicting call I had earlier. And the recent discussion has helped me understand sort of what's going on here. I guess the ultimate question I have is there a concern that was raised or some issue that's been bubbling up that maybe I'm not aware of? Because I got to tell you, I'm literally hours away from asking 2 boards to vote to, move forward with the merger. And so I need to know like what's causing this in order to be able to explain like where this is coming from at this point, because otherwise they're going to, presumptively assume there was a breakdown in process.
Yeah.
So I don't mean to put it, I don't know who to ask that question of or where this sort of is sourced from, but and we're literally on the cusp of making this reality, and to bring this up now is kind of a challenge.
I'm happy to rescind my comments and just say fine +1 to merge. It seems like that's really the concerning, the thing that has thrust people into.
And if it came from Jory, I guess I didn't even know who raised this. So Jory, if it was you who raised it, I think, based on all the discussions to date, I don't think the boards are unreasonable or willing to entertain any reasonable proposal on this front. It's just a matter of they're ready to go. And, to reopen something like this right now would be extremely disruptive. So I just want to make sure everybody's aware of that.
I think I'm just a little bit surprised because we're just now voting to move this stuff to stage 2. And so to understand that the board is going to take a vote on drafts,
well, they're waiting to hear that everything's ready to go to move forward in stages.
Yeah.
So, if things move forward, then I have, I can deliver on their expectations and allow them to start voting on things.
We had also set expectations with this group, or asked if it was reasonable that we could make this announcement at the Open Source Leadership Summit, which really ties our hands for how much time we can revisit what things. And that was discussed, I want to say 2, maybe 3 weeks ago.
Yeah, I suspect it was 2 weeks ago at the meeting.
Yeah. To Tierney's point about 0-day fixes, I would say a 0-day fix would look disingenuous, and that is a concern for me. working with this within the bounds of building an individual membership program, finding out that it's not growing as rapidly, and then maybe going back and asking for a modification to the constraints on it in 6 months or a year if we find that it's, we've now got 500 or 1,000 people, but we're not trending toward 2,000 anytime soon, or anytime rapidly. That I think would be more reasonable and more open to a good engagement. I mean, to Mike's point, the boards are not unreasonable, but we need to understand what and why. And I don't necessarily think, especially given that we're bringing these two groups together and we're making something completely different, that looking at this in terms of taking something away is reasonable, because we're trying to figure out what the right structure is for this group now, not how it looks compared to the other one or any other one. It feels like a scarcity model as opposed to we can do what we need to do. What do we need to do?
Yeah, I'm not sure I heard that from Jory's perspective. I think I heard maybe there was some expectation that there would be a board representation for the other projects. And I can see that being like, okay, if that's not going to happen, that is a bit of a change.
But is that not also the CPC directorship? So the CPC has two positions, one allocated potentially to the chair, it doesn't have to be, and one allocated to whomever the CPC agrees, which we think right now in the early days is likely to be a node seat.
Yeah, I'm not too worried that we don't have enough seats. I'm just reflecting what I could understand.
Yeah, I'm absolutely not saying that we need more seats. That's absolutely not what I'm saying. Not at all what I'm saying. I think where I was confused, and perhaps others were confused, was that we had these competing proposals, as we discussed, that both were landed as stage one where there was some question about whether the representation was going to be the 3 seats, 2 of which were floating, and then the 3 seats, 1 of which was floating and 1 of which was earmarked for the individual membership. At some point, we selected the latter, and that's how things kind of progressed. And my question is just, does that necessarily, do we need to do that now? Do we need to make that distinction now? Can we go back to the first draft, or the first option where there were 2 floating seats, and then switch over to the third being the individual membership at a later date? But again, my goal was not to disrupt the good progress of everyone here, or to to spark any panic or anything. But I thought this would actually be a fairly straightforward question. But it seems like a lot of people are concerned that this will derail the progress and stuff, and I don't want to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So if the question is, if the statement is that we need to +1 this, and perhaps look at making those changes in 6 to 9 months, because I do think it's going to take quite a bit of time to get the individual membership program to the level where there's we can support that. So if the statement that if the boards would prefer for us to have to come back and say, hey, this isn't quite working the way we thought it would, we'd like to convert that to another floating seat, then fine. But that's all I was trying to say.
Thank you.
Thank you for the discussion.
Do you think that there's, I mean, so something that I could suggest that maybe splits the difference here, Jory, and maybe this can be a fair way of doing it. Do you think, and maybe this doesn't make sense, I'm just thinking out loud here. Do you think that this is a caveat that we could add to the CPC charter, that seat is something that will be revisited in 6 months? Since we need to bring the CPC charter back to the board anyways to add the language regarding like how projects are chartered, perhaps we can add this language into it as well. And, you know, we can agree on like we can maybe even agree on explicit language that we can add right now to move it to stage 2. We can augment it with the language and then send it back to the boards. And we could just have something in the charter that says, you know, like 6 months after the formation of the new foundation, we will evaluate the individual membership board seat and track that it looks like something that will happen. And if not, we'll work with the board to reassign what that seat will be used for. Would it being like kind of explicit there make you feel a little bit better about it?
Well, if you know, if accordingly to Mike and Sarah and the other current board members who are on the call, if you know, if there's no intention of the board to prevent our communities from using those board seats effectively, I don't feel like we need to even. I don't feel like that's necessary, because I will take everyone at their good word that, you know, if we make such a hopefully very pragmatic request, that it would not be denied.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Michael, what about for yourself?
Yeah, I mean, as you said, I already plussed one. The other one, you know, it was on the understanding we had consensus, but we've worked through the discussion. I'm fine.
Okay, and I want to apologize for nitpicking through those proposals, because that was a little rulery, and that's not really what we're trying to get towards. It was more an intent for me to talk about like where my confusion is coming from here. That like I did not know that we had like this kind of miscommunication, and I want to make really sure that if we are going to land these things, that we're doing it in a way where it doesn't leave a bad taste in people's mouth or makes them feel like we've rushed through something.
That is very important. Like, I really don't want this to feel as if we jammed something through.
And so, Jory, like I want to just like, you don't just represent yourself here, and you represent a viewpoint that I'm sure a lot of other people are going to have. And I want to let you know that I will support you if you want to see this augmented and you think that that's really important for right now. And I'm sure that we can find a way to make it work. You know, it's just a little bit of extra work, but we can do this. So, you know, like I just want to make sure that, you know, you don't feel pressured into stepping down on this. If you really do believe that that third seat should be allocated early and then flip, you know, I'm willing to put in the legwork to make that happen. So I just want to give you one more opportunity to kind of push on that if that's the direction you think we should go. I don't have a great feeling personally about the way this conversation has gone.
You know, I decline to respond. Thank you, though.
Okay. So with where we're at right now on the agenda, does anyone object to landing the CPC charter as it's currently written in issue number 100 as a stage 2 proposal? Okay, so we can move forward and land that. The next one that we have on here is the individual membership proposal to stage 2. This has gone through a number of different things. It includes information about the board seats. There is not any major substantive changes between the stage 1 and the stage 2 proposal, aside from removing some of the things that were necessary for it to move forward. as well as some of the language to reflect how the project progression proposal went. Does anyone object to landing number 102, the individual membership proposal as stage 2? Okay, so that one can move forward. Finally, the last proposal that we need to get through was number 103, the community board reps to stage 2. This one has the explicit language around how those board seats will be determined and where they're put. There similarly is no substantive changes from the current stage 1 proposal, aside from removing some of the unresolved questions and the reference to the alternative proposal. Does anyone object to landing the community board reps to stage 2? Okay, so we can go ahead and merge all of those. I will work on getting the language in for the CPC charter, and also, for what it's worth, the current stage 1 proposals for individual membership, as well as the community board reps. There was no concerns or pushback from the board on those proposals. We had a few more things on the agenda, specifically naming of the foundation, digging into a draft proposal about the language for project exit clauses, something for the project-directed funding, as well as something about next steps. But as we only have 3 minutes left on the agenda for today, I think that we can just go ahead and call the meeting for now. Does anyone else have anything to add right now before we wrap? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and stop the stream. Thank you, everyone, for your participation today.